Joining us now on the Deseret First Credit Union hotline is our good friend, college football insider and expert at ESPN, Trevor Matich. Trevor, welcome back to the program. College football is now over. What in the world are we supposed to do?
Well, now we have to focus in on recruiting because there are 3 college football seasons, right? There's the regular season, there's spring football, and there's recruiting. So now it's recruiting, so it never ends. We must never allow a moment in our lives when college football does not consume at least part of our attention.
And today is the end of the dead period, so it's on full court press. Rumors of Jim Harbaugh sleeping over at a recruit's house, all this fun stuff. But yesterday, big news out of San Antonio with the NCAA and that proposal. What was your reaction to that Big 12 proposal vote yesterday?
I was surprised that they allowed the Big 12 to have a conference championship game with only 10 teams, because that allows them to kind of have their cake and eat it too, like other conferences don't have the opportunity to do. Right now, the Big 12 television revenue and all their revenue that they share is only divided amongst 10 teams instead of as many as 14 in other conferences. If they have a conference championship game, the projection is that'll bring in another $25 to $35 million of revenue divided among 10 teams instead of as many as 14 in other conferences. And so I'm a little bit surprised that the other conferences via the NCAA allowed this to go forward, because it gives the Big 12 an advantage. But from a standpoint of BYU, it's tough, because now whether or not they expand will come down to what their financials are, rather than NCAA mandate in order for them to have that 13th data point for the College Football Playoff Committee, because the Playoff Committee has made it clear that teams that play that extra game do have an edge over teams that don't, which means Big 12 teams. And I can see why, because you're exposed to losing, you're exposed to injury, you're exposed to another team that'll be highly ranked, and the Big 12 hasn't had to have that exposure.
Oklahoma President David Boren has unleashed his verbal distaste against the decision yesterday, saying that ultimately he wants the Longhorn Network gone so that the Big 12 could potentially have their own TV contract. He still feels like the conference is disadvantaged because they have less teams than any other conference. And it kind of looks like Oklahoma, I don't know, maybe might bolt. Is that too crazy to say right now, Trevor?
Oklahoma might bolt. They almost bolted in the last round of expansion. And I disagree with a couple of things there. I think that the fact that the Big 12 only has 10 teams helps teams like Oklahoma. Because if you start adding teams, you add competition. I mean, look at the SEC. They had Missouri, who won 2 of the last 3 SEC East championships. They had Texas A&M, who gave Alabama a black eye in Tuscaloosa a couple of years ago. The Pac-12 had Utah. Utah beats Oregon, and that knocked them out of what it appeared to be a berth in the Pac-12 championship game, because Oregon beat Stanford. And so these new teams that are coming into these conferences are causing trouble for the traditional powers in those conferences at times. And so the Big 12 at the top, Oklahoma and TCU, Baylor, Texas, when they get back, it doesn't help them to have more competition that can knock them off from time to time. So I think 10 teams for them is a big advantage, not a disadvantage. The whole thing with the Longhorn Network, I think, could be worked out. But I think for Oklahoma, they haven't liked for a long, long time, I mean decades, Texas throwing their weight around. And I think that's a big part of the issue. Texas has been the big dog. Texas has the Longhorn Network. Texas had a certain attitude, and I don't think Oklahoma appreciated it. I think that's one of the reasons that they're flirting, and they have flirted with the possibility that they might bolt. And I don't think it would be in their interest to bolt. I think competitively they're best to stay right where they are. But I can see where they're a little bit chapped by their place in that conference.
Yet they still have a basketball series with Texas, just saying. What does all of this mean for BYU in the short term, in your opinion, Trevor?
Well, in the short term, it means they need to decide if they want to stay independent or move into a smaller conference, or sit around and wait and see what happens in any future expansion. The fact that the Big 12 doesn't have to expand to get a championship game doesn't mean that they won't. It may well be that as they negotiate with television partners coming up, and that means, when their contract is up, it's going to be a while before it is, but when it is up, they'll be talking to ESPN, Fox, CBS, NBC. I mean, everybody will be in the running for it. it. And it may well be that they'll be asked to expand into some other markets. And the thing about BYU is that BYU would expand the Big 12's national footprint without expanding their geographical footprint. In other words, BYU is a true national program. You know, Texas Tech and Kansas State and other programs, they're good programs, but they don't have the national cachet that BYU does. So from a television network standpoint, you've got a draw for eyeballs in BYU that doesn't exist in that many schools nationwide in terms of drawing interest from coast to coast and from north to south. And so that's an advantage for BYU. But in the short term, I'm guessing that they'll wait around and see what happens for the next round of expansion. I don't know that they'll want to get committed to a Power 5 conference if there's still a possibility that the big Power 5 schools might expand, and a commitment to a Group of 5 conference might keep BYU from going into that expansion. So there are a lot of complexities there. And BYU in the short term, I think, needs to wait around and see how things shake out.
BYU is still waiting on the rest of the coaching hire announces in terms of the assistants. Right now, Kalani Sitake, the head guy, Ty Detmer, the offensive coordinator, Elisa Tuiaki, the defensive coordinator, and Ed Lamb as an assistant head coach. How much of a concern is it that at this point BYU hasn't locked down all of those assistant coaches?
It is okay, and the reason is they are better off taking their time to get it right than to get somebody locked in and to be able to tell recruits. One recruiting class is not going to make this program going forward or this coaching staff. And the only real reason to get it locked in immediately is to make sure you got recruiting squared away. Otherwise, it's important to get it right, because long term you need the guys that are not just motivators and not just recruiters, but guys that are teachers. That's what made BYU great under Lavelle. He assembled a staff of coaches that were some of the best teachers I've ever seen in football. Now, I played there for 4 years and 12 years in the NFL. And some of the best teachers I ever was associated with at the coaching level were at BYU. Just our offensive line coaches, Roger French and Mel Olson. I played for some outstanding offensive line coaches in the NFL. Alex Gibbs, who I was with the Colts, he went on to the Denver Broncos and won a bunch of Super Bowls there. Jim Hannafin with the Washington Redskins, one of the greatest offensive line coaches of his time. Guys like that, and I'll tell you that Roger French and Mel Olson were at that level with those guys in terms of teaching young men how to play the game and how to be young men, how to grow from a young man into a grown man. And those are the kinds of guys that Coach Sitake will want to bring in. And you don't want to jump the gun because you feel the pressure of time. It's important to get it right.
When we have less than 6 months to fall camp, so we can certainly start speculating on that, and that's what we do. Let's say that Taysom Hill gets into camp and he stays at BYU and he's healthy, and you have this quarterback battle. Who should start in the fall in your way too early quarterback projection for 2016?
The interesting thing there is, if he stays healthy, I think Taysom should. But the interesting thing is that foot injury that he had is a severe thing, and he's been injured a couple of times now, and they can't count on him staying healthy. If he does stay healthy, he'll be one of the best in the country, and he'll be a Heisman candidate. But the thing about Taysom is that he's not the pocket passer that Tanner Mangum is. And so if you build an offense around Taysom Hill and he gets hurt, then you've got to kind of rejigger your style to get Tanner in there if that's what you want to do. I think there's another opportunity here, and that is to get Bo Hodge into the mix. Bo Hodge is a mobile quarterback, and he is a much better passer than he gets credit for. And I think that he's much more similar to Taysom Hill than Tanner Mangum is. You've got a possibility here. If Mangum looks like he's if Taysom Hill looks like he's healthy, you've got an opportunity to redshirt Tanner Mangum. Let Bo Hodge and Taysom compete for who will be the starter. And then let's say it is Taysom. Then if he gets hurt, you've got a guy with a similar skill set and probably a better passing skill set in Bo Hodge that could come in and take over. And then you've got a competition going forward with Tanner Mangum joining the fight in the following year, having redshirted, and so he didn't burn that year. So I think that might be an interesting possibility for BYU, and that will depend really on what Taysom's health is. You know, if they feel like he can go into this season with an even chance of staying healthy, then I think the Bo Hodge Taysom Hill competition with a red shirt on Mangum would be an interesting possibility.
ESPN's Trevor Matich with us on BYU Sports Nation. While we're on the topic of way too early 2016 college football projections, who is your way too early national champion frontrunner for next year, Trevor?
Well, I think the front runner is going to be Clemson, just because they've got the best football player, or best quarterback certainly in college football, coming back in Deshaun Watson. And they've got a lot of other people coming back as well. They'll have to rebuild part of their defense, but they've got some good players coming up. Clemson's a good one. But some of the teams I think that are a bit under the radar, watch out for Baylor now. Baylor they were on their fourth quarterback late in the season, who was a wide receiver. He wasn't even a quarterback. And yet they still managed to win 10 games and win their bowl game against North Carolina. Michigan is a team to watch out for. They've got 16 starters back. They won 10 games in their first year. And in the second year under their new head coach, Jim Harbaugh, you can expect a big jump. And as long as they can replace their quarterback, Jake Rudock, Michigan will be a team that will cause a lot of trouble. So I would look at some of those teams. LSU as well was really built for next year, not this year. And with Leonard Fournette coming back at running back, LSU is a team that should really come into its own this next year. So those are some teams I'm looking for. If I had to pick one, it would be probably LSU because of the nature of the talent that they have coming back.
Yeah, the easy pick certainly is Clemson. And last year at this time it was Ohio State. They didn't even make the playoff when all was said and done. And that's the fun part of college football. Yet, when you look at the Heisman race, we could have a lot of the same dudes in New York. Do you have anyone outside of your way too early top three Heisman candidates in McCaffrey, Fournette, and Watson? Do you have anyone outside of those three in your three?
Yeah, you know, Seth Russell, the quarterback for Baylor, at the time he got hurt, he was the number one quarterback in the nation in adjusted quarterback rating. In other words, your overall rating adjusted for the caliber of the defenses that you faced. And he remained number one in the nation, even though he was hurt for most of the year, and he finished number three. Well, he's a guy that's got the passing skills of the good passing quarterbacks that they've had there. Bryce Petty is the guy that he replaced. Bryce Petty went on to the NFL. But he's also got the running skills of an RG3. So all of a sudden, you've got the best of all worlds there. And if he's able to stay healthy, you'll have a guy that'll put up monster numbers in an offense that's designed for that. And he'll have Baylor in the national championship picture all year long. So I think a dark horse to look for is Baylor's quarterback, Seth Russell.
Clearly, there is no offseason for Trevor Matich when it comes to talking college football. Well done, my friend. We appreciate the time.
Appreciate it, guys.